of the Army Museum's Board of Governors, which just means I just do what Colonel Gilchrist and the board tell me. So on behalf of my co-host, Mr. William H. Syll, if you haven't met him, the Acting Principal Officer of the Consulate General of the United States in Halifax, welcome to the Army Museum and the opening of our War of 1812 exhibit. Charlotte Syll will make certain that we remain on time and on target, and for that we thank you, or they all thank you anyway. We are honored to have with us this evening Brigadier-General the Honourable J.J. Grant, the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia, and Her Honour Mrs. Joan Grant. His Honour is a lifelong member and supporter of the Army Museum, and for that, sir, we thank you. I would like to say a special welcome to Michelle Raymond. Where is she? There we are. The MLA for Halifax Atlantic and a member of the Provincial Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. She is representing the Minister of Community Affairs, Culture and Heritage this evening, and thank you for all of your support, ma'am. We have an unexpected guest who we are very, very pleased to welcome to the museum, Lieutenant General retired Bill Leach, who knows, I think, almost everybody in the room. A former commander of the Army and now chair of the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Civilization, Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. If you don't know him, seek him out. Start strong arming him. He's an important guy in Ottawa. He'll be here to help us. So I didn't say that to him. We were speaking earlier, but that's actually why. We also have with us this evening a guest from Heritage Canada, the Royal Canadian Legion, various regimental associations. I think there's even guardsmen in the room. The Nova Scotia Museum and Archives, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, closely related as the War of 1812 in our history, our naval comrades, and also the Maritime Command Museum, all of whom are friends to this gem of our museum. Since 1953, the Army Museum has enjoyed a very unique relationship with Parks Canada and the Halifax Citadel. The tripartite effort this year has been exceptional, and together we will make Halifax Citadel the focal point for Nova Scotia, if not all of Atlantic Canada, for the commemoration of the War of 1812. I hope that during the course of the evening, everyone here will take the opportunity to introduce yourselves to one another, that good, warm Nova Scotian hospitality. Even though Halifax isn't necessarily Cape Breton, we're all very friendly. Our Prime Minister has called the War of 1812 a seminal event in Canadian history. Certainly Canada would not exist today but for the American invasion and it being repelled. Quebec's French-speaking identity would not have been enshrined in our national culture, and in fact Aboriginal Canadians would certainly have found their way of life profoundly altered. From June of 1812 to February of 1815, it took the combined efforts of the British Army, the Royal Navy, English and French-speaking militias, as well as the Aboriginal Canadians to repel the Canadian invasion. A long list of Canadian heroes, such as Sir Isaac Brock, Laura Secord, Tecumseh, John Norton, and Charles Michel de Salaberry, helped defend our country in a time of crisis. The War of 1812 is arguably the first of many events that ultimately led to Canadian Confederation some 55 years later, creating this great nation. And as all of us know, Nova Scotia being one of the, I will call, the founding colonies to make that all happen. But some of the other events included the rebellions of Upper and Lower Canada, which I used today in speaking with a number of ministers from Upper and Lower Canada. I have to say, not as well received today as it was then. A growing reluctance on the part of Britain to garrison its colonies. The termination, a surprise to all Canadians today, of the Canadian Reciprocity Treaty with the United States following the end of the Civil War. And now look at us today. Fear of the American doctrine of manifest destiny backed by the vast and battle-hardened Union Army. The War of 1812 was the first indicator that Canada should stand on its own as a country in its own right. Today, the United States is indisputably Canada's most important economic and military ally. The Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817 and the Treaty of 1818 created the world's longest demilitarized border, almost 8,500 kilometers in length. Unless, of course, you've tried to pass from New Brunswick into Quebec in the last week or so, I'm not so certain. Every day, billions of dollars worth of trade cross the border, enriching both of our nations. With the exceptions of the Boer War, Americans have fought in every one of Canada's armed conflict as allies and friends. There are many who question why the Canadian government is putting so much emphasis on commemorating the bicentennial of the War of 1812. John Below is here, he can probably fill you in. But perhaps the real question is, or should be, why have we not commemorated it in the past? I believe that in the past, commemorating the war might have been seen as anti-American. There's no fear of that today. It is anything but, and that is why I thought it important to have this event co-hosted by the senior representative of the American government in Halifax, in a post that I think has been very long-standing, perhaps in fact since the War of 1812. The War of 1812, really, would you like the Canadian or the American perspective? Of course, Mr. Phil will really go first despite my comments. Sir, please.
Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen, for me this is quite an introduction to Halifax. I wasn't really too sure what General Thurrott meant when he invited me to come here to the opening of this exhibit. But I said, well, the Americans were here 200 years ago, so I can come back again. It's not going to be a big problem. My wife and I have only been here about 9 days. We got here last Wednesday. We spent 3.5 years in Ottawa. Before 4 winters in Ottawa. So now we're looking for some hospitality here from Halifax. The bicentennial of the War of 1812 is a tremendous opportunity for both Canadians and Americans to understand the basis for our country's relationship and just how unique and important it really is. In Halifax, the War of 1812 laid the groundwork for our current consulate, which is the oldest diplomatic post in what is now Canada. Long before the Geneva Convention or the Red Cross, the United States and Great Britain had agreed on agents on each other's turf to ensure the fair and proper treatment of the prisoners. Britain had their agent in Boston, and the United States had one of our agents here in Halifax. Now, Melville Island Prison housed over 8,000 Americans during the War of 1812. Almost 200 Americans are buried on Dead Man's Island. We honor them every U.S. Memorial Day. While conditions were certainly hard during that time of 1812 to 1815, it is generally accepted that all the U.S. prisoners of war here in Halifax were treated very fairly. For the United States, the Treaty of Ghent brought a fair and honorable end to the war. No territory was lost. For us, the War of 1812 was our second engagement with Britain to prove that we truly were an independent nation and had to be treated that way on land and on the sea. The war gave our Navy their battle cry of "Don't give up the ship." It laid the groundwork for our outstanding Coast Guard, provided a young country with a national anthem, and allowed the home of our president to get a fresh coat of white paint. And my wife and I are from New Orleans, and so as a product of Louisiana, the battle I am most familiar with is the Battle of New Orleans. Now, had we possessed the communication infrastructure that we had today, that wouldn't even have happened. But it did, so it's one of the things that my wife and I are familiar with, and we're looking forward to the other aspects of the War of 1812 commemorated up here in this museum. Perhaps the most important outcome of the war was also gaining a strong independent northern neighbor called Canada, a country that for the past 200 years has been our ally and partner in developing North America and engaging the rest of the world. I believe this story of a 2-century friendship and partnership is the most important message that needs to be highlighted by both our countries during this shared bicentennial of the War of 1812. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Mr. Syll. And from a purely Canadian perspective, a simple one, declaring a victor in the War of 1812 is easy, because most of us in this room will not be voting in the November presidential election. Now, for most Canadians, the War of 1812 was all about Major General Sir Isaac Brock, the Battle of Queenston Heights and Lundy's Lane, and the sack of York, which we all now call Toronto. For many in Upper Canada, Toronto remains the center of their universe. Not something that we hold true here in Halifax. But there's much more to the War of 1812, however, and the Army Museum has strived to provide it. Many people, for example, are unaware that here in Halifax, Major General Robert Ross, who led the sack in Washington, D.C. in 1814, who was killed shortly thereafter, lies interred in the old burying ground at the intersection of Barrington Street and Spring Garden Road. Many of us pass that place daily, but as university students are slaves to the corporate part of Halifax. But also consider the story of Laura Secord, If you ask the average Canadian which attack she is famous for warning the British about, you might get some very interesting answers. So for our museum, that has meant that the exhibit could not only simply be artifacts and images, but also detailed explanations. And as you're wandering around this evening, don't ask those of us in current military uniform, ask folks like Ken Hines, John Harrison's here, Barry Taylor, guys with all those medals on, they have War of 1812 on their chest, so. But hopefully we have struck a good balance, both informing and entertaining museum visitors. So we hope that you will leave this place knowing more about a seminal event in the history of our country. The Army Museum exhibit of the War of 1812 provides an overview of the war, including many of the key land battles won and lost by both sides. The exhibit puts emphasis on the war from an Atlantic Canadian perspective and highlights the role played by our First Nations, Black Canadians, and our military. Putting together a special exhibit on the War of 1812 was a major challenge from the Army Museum's volunteer staff, both in terms of resources and expertise. Without funding from the Government of Canada's 1812 Commemorative Fund, truly this exhibit would not have been possible. The funds provided by our government will have a beneficial impact on the museum for years to come. Constructing the exhibit was a learning experience that will serve the museum well as we prepare for the centennial of the commencement of the First World War, which today, surprised me, I have to tell people, will be in 2014. As you can appreciate, the Army Museum would not have been possible to produce without the support of many government departments and the personal touch of the representatives, other museums and archives, as well as private citizens who sometimes like to remain anonymous, and many of you are represented here this evening. I cannot possibly single out everyone, but please accept our sincere thanks for your critical contribution. But I should note that many of the images used to illustrate the war are being shown for the first time in Atlantic Canada. We are truly indebted to the many organizations and artists who have given the museum permission to use their images and art. One individual that I simply must acknowledge is Dr. Ross McGuinness. Ross has been a long time and active supporter of this museum. His knowledge of the weapons is second to none, and any of you may challenge it. But as you might understand, the museum did not have many American weapons dating from the 1812 period. And Ross did a great job of acquiring and donating many of the weapons that you will see here. Quite a remarkable achievement. In recognition of Dr. McGuinness's contribution to the museum's gun room will be named the Dr. Ross McGuinness Gun Room. So thank you, Ross. For those of you who know me well aren't at all surprised that I'm still talking. So let me sum up as best I can. So while our new War of 1812 exhibit is tonight's feature for the museum, I would ask you to take a good look at some of the other displays that have been improved upon since last year. For anyone who has not seen Major General Wolfe's cloak, and it is indeed grand in many senses, it is a must-see. The display on William Hall, Nova Scotia's first Victoria Cross recipient, is a winner, and in Casement 5, the revised Service Battalion display and the new 1st Field Regiment Royal Canadian Artillery display features the original Grey Cup. And Paul Allen's here, who is the current commanding officer of Service Battalion, if you wish to chat with him. So your honors, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the formal portion of the evening, and I ask that you join their honors as we move upstairs, don't move yet, to officially open the museum's War of 1812. Both doors will be open for the museum to accommodate all of us, so that we don't all try to enter Casement 1 at the same time. You're welcome to bring along a glass of American wine with your splendid taste, as it was not a prize of the War of 1812, but a gift from our American colleagues here in Halifax. Mr. Syll and I ask that you please relax and enjoy the evening, but before you are freed from listening to me and my speech making, please allow me to read a letter from my boss, who happens to be an honorable member of Parliament, Minister McCain, Minister of National Defence. So, to me and all of the friends of the Army Museum, he thanks us. I'm gonna actually read it out. The ADC could do it, but no, I'll do it. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this wonderful opening reception. While each and every military conflict in our history has played a role in the shaping of our country, the War of 1812 was one of particular importance. Halifax has a uniquely rich history tied to the War of 1812. From Dead Man's and Melville Islands to the capturing of USS Chesapeake, to the revamping of defenses at Citadel Hill, the city was often a key hub of wartime activity. As such, the museum's commemorative exhibit is a wonderful way to preserve and showcase the historic time for Nova Scotians, for Canadians, and for visitors from beyond our borders. Through this exhibit, through the Tall Ships 2012 Festival this summer, and through the commemorative events taking place over the months to come, Halifax is sure to remember and celebrate the significance of this very important part of our history. I offer my sincere thanks to our museum for inviting me to this reception, and to the staff, importantly the volunteers and donors who help to keep the museum central to Cyril's history. Your work and commitment to our history is commendable and greatly valued, and I thank you for ongoing efforts to ensuring that Canadians remember the War of 1812. ADC, where's the check? I'm just kidding. We already have it. Thank you very much. So certainly, a proud Nova Scotian as he is, can't make it tonight this evening, sadly, but we have the Lieutenant Governor. And so at this note, I'm not going to ask you to say a few words, sir. I would like them people come and share a glass of wine with you as we go through. So without further ado, we would like to invite you all upstairs. Thank you very much.
After all that,